afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us for today's presentation. My name is Marissa, an attorney with Legal Aid of North Carolina's Helpline. Today we have Lainey Harris presenting for us. If you are unfamiliar with the format of this event, first, Lainey is going to review a PowerPoint presentation. At the end of the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. If at any point during the presentation you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comments section on Facebook. We'll review all questions put in the chat boxes during the Q&A session at the end. Please remember that this is a public forum and Legal Aid is not representing you at this time. Lainey will go over this in more detail, but please remember to keep your questions as general as possible, as we cannot provide any legal advice specific to your individual situation. The session will end when there are no more questions, and regardless of where we are, we will have a hard stop at 4:30 p.m. With all that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Lainey to get us started.
Hi, thank you, Marissa. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. So our topic is SNAP 101. We have 4 subtopics, which are applying for SNAP benefits, maximizing your benefits, recertifying, and knowing your rights. So first, what is SNAP? SNAP stands for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's also commonly known as Food and Nutrition Services, FNS benefits, or by its old name of food stamps. And this is a program that provides low-income households with money each month to help them purchase food. The money is put on a reusable EBT card, and it can only be used to purchase eligible food items. Our first subtopic is applying for SNAP benefits. There are several ways that you can apply, and you can choose whatever works best for you and your family. You can apply in person at your local county Department of Social Services or DSS office. You can get a paper application either online or at DSS, fill that out yourself, and then submit it by fax or mail to DSS. Or you can apply fully online through the ePass portal. Every applicant has the right to file an application on the same day they visit DSS during office hours. So if you want to apply in person, you have a right to go in person to DSS and have someone help you complete that application that same day. Submitting the application, though, is not the end of the process. After you submit an application, you'll also be interviewed by a caseworker, and they may ask for additional documentation, such as proof of your income. If you would like more information on how to apply, you can visit this website with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. It has really great information on how to apply, who may be eligible for benefits. It also has copies of the application itself in English as well as in Spanish. There are some general eligibility rules for SNAP benefits. To be eligible, you must have an eligible immigration status, be a North Carolina resident, and meet certain income rules. I will also flag that for some people, there are work requirement rules. Not everyone, just some people, and we'll talk more about that later in our presentation. These work requirements were waived during the COVID-19 public health emergency, but they have now started again. A little bit more on immigrant eligibility. There are several statuses that can make someone eligible for SNAP benefits. First, of course, are U.S. citizens. Lawful permanent residents or green card holders are also eligible for SNAP benefits. However, they generally cannot receive SNAP until 5 years after they lawfully entered the U.S. Refugees, asylees, and Afghan special immigrants and parolees are also eligible for SNAP benefits without a waiting period. Not everyone in the household has to have an eligible immigration status. You can apply just for people in the household who do have an eligible status. So for example, if there are children in a family who have an eligible status, but the parents don't, the parents can apply for SNAP benefits on behalf of the children and receive them just for the children, even though the parents themselves are not eligible. DSS cannot require you to provide a Social Security number for household members who are not applying for SNAP benefits. This chart shows the income rules for SNAP benefits. It varies by the household size. Many households in North Carolina are categorically eligible. This means that they have income below 200% the federal poverty level, which is that number there for the gross income limit, and they have no disqualified household members. This is a big deal because there is no assets test for categorically eligible households. So for those folks, it doesn't matter how much money they have in a bank account or how many cars are in their name or any other assets like that. DSS is only going to be looking at their monthly income when deciding whether they're eligible for SNAP and how much they're eligible for. There is a felony controlled substance ban. This applies to people who committed and were convicted after August 23rd, 1996, of a felony that involved possession, use, or distribution of a controlled substance. Those folks are permanently disqualified from receiving SNAP benefits. However, though there is an exception for people who committed a Class H or Class I felony, so a subset of those people who committed a substance felony, they may reestablish their eligibility for SNAP and start to get SNAP benefits again if it's been at least 6 months since they were released from custody and they complete an assessment with their area mental health authority. Now here's a little bit more about those work requirements that I referenced. To continue receiving SNAP benefits, people who are considered able-bodied adults without dependents must work 80 hours a month, an average of 20 hours a week, or be participating in a work program for 80 hours a month, 20 hours a week. Not everyone is going to be an able-bodied adult without dependents. We'll talk more in our next slide about who that applies to. But for those folks, they do have to be working in order to maintain their SNAP benefits. That 80 hours a month of work can be self-employment, employment for wages, volunteer work, work in exchange for goods or services, or a combination of any of these things. So if someone is working an hourly job where they're paid wages for 10 hours a week, and then they have a self-employment job like driving for a ride share for 10 hours a week, those hours add up to 20 hours a week. And so they meet the work requirement, even though it's across 2 different jobs. There's also a good cause exception for people who would have worked 80 hours a month, but missed some work for good cause. They'll still be considered to have met the work requirements if their absence from work was just temporary and they kept their job. So some examples could be temporary illness, a household emergency, or temporary unavailability of transportation. Any kind of circumstance where you normally meet the work requirements, but for some reason outside of your control, you didn't for 1 month just because of some unforeseen issue that isn't ongoing and you kept your job and are still working, that's a good cause exception. If you don't meet these work requirements, or an exception that we'll talk about next, you can only get SNAP benefits for any 3 months in a 36-month period. So here are the exemptions. So these are people who do not have to meet the work requirements. The first is just based on age. So for people who are under 18 years old or at least 55 years old, they do not have to meet the work requirements. If they are within a SNAP household that contains a member under age 18, they also don't have to meet the work requirements. Notably, that minor in the household does not have to be the child of the person who is claiming an exemption or even related to them at all. It really just matters that they're in the same household. So for example, if there's a family with 2 parents and 2 children, if one of those children is 19 and let's say one is 16, the 16-year-old makes everyone in that household exempt from the work requirements, and their parents and their sibling are all going to be are all going to be exempt from the work requirements because there's a minor in the household. People who are pregnant or homeless are also exempt, as well as veterans. And a more recent change is that veterans are exempt regardless of the conditions of their discharge. So it doesn't matter if it was honorable or dishonorable, as long as they are a veteran, they're exempt from the work requirements. People who are between the ages of 18 and 24 and were also in foster care when they turned 18 are exempt from the work requirements until after age 24. And then the last category is for those who are considered unfit for employment. This can come from a variety of different things, but it covers people who are receiving workers' compensation, disability benefits like Social Security, disability, or SSI, or Medicaid based on a disability. It also includes people who have been medically certified as unfit for employment. There's a form that DSS uses for this if someone believes that they are unable to work due to a disability. DSS can provide them with a form that they can have a doctor or another medical provider fill out saying that in their medical opinion, the person cannot work 20 hours a week due to physical or mental health conditions. And that form can exempt someone from the work requirements. This is commonly used by people who are pursuing disability benefits, but have not yet been awarded disability benefits. This form can help them be exempt from the work requirements while they're waiting for their disability benefits. It also includes people who are unable to work due to alcohol or drug addiction, or people who are at least a half-time student. But just note that there are some other special rules that apply to college students that can also make them ineligible for SNAP. And then lastly, a catch-all category for people who are obviously unfit for work based on the caseworker's observation or judgment. So if you are an able-bodied adult without dependents, it's important for you to report your work activity to DSS, because remember, if you're not working, you're not eligible for SNAP benefits after 3 months. You should also report to DSS if you believe that you meet one of those exemptions we just talked about. It's important to always keep DSS up to date. Don't assume that they have the correct and updated information in your file. A lot can change in a short period of time, and so it's important to make sure that DSS has your correct address, phone number, work information, living situation information, and knows about whether you're receiving disability benefits or if you've become pregnant. Now we're going to talk about how to maximize your SNAP benefits to get all of the SNAP dollars that you're entitled to. This chart here shows the maximum monthly SNAP benefit by household size. As you can see, it increases as the size of the household increases, but do note that this is the maximum and that not every household is going to get the maximum. The County Department of Social Services, or DSS, determines the household's individual monthly SNAP benefit based on the household's income, household size, and certain expenses. And when I say household, that generally means people who live together and buy or cook food together. Of course, higher monthly income means the household receives less SNAP benefits. But if the household has higher certain monthly expenses, they can receive more SNAP benefits. There are two types of verifications that DSS may request during a SNAP application. They are required verifications and recommended verifications. Required verifications are necessary to determine SNAP eligibility, and they must be provided in order for DSS to process a SNAP application. Recommended verifications, however, though, are optional, and they're used to determine benefit levels. So you don't have to provide the recommended verifications, but providing them can help you get more SNAP dollars sometimes. So usually it's in your best interest to provide the recommended verifications. Some examples of required verifications include proof of identity, proof of citizenship or immigration status, proof of household size, Social Security number for those who are applying, and then proof of income. Recommended verifications are for expenses that DSS takes into account when determining SNAP amounts. DSS does not consider all expenses, just certain expenses. So these include things like utility expenses, mortgage or rental expenses, property taxes and insurance if you own your home, medical expenses for people with disabilities or older people, child support payments that someone in the household pays for a child who is not in the household, and then childcare expenses that are incurred by the household in order for someone to work. Now we're going to talk a little bit about recertifying for SNAP benefits. Most SNAP households have to recertify every 6 months. And that involves filling out a form that looks a lot like the original SNAP application. It asks a lot of the same questions about who lives in the household, what the income is, and what their expenses are. DSS mails the household that form, and it has to be returned to DSS by the 15th day of the last month of the certification period. Failure to provide it by that date can cause a potential lapse in SNAP benefits. So best practice is to submit all of the required and recommended verifications by the 15th day of the last month as well, just so that DSS can quickly process everything together and avoid any lapse in benefits. So for example, if we have a household that's certified for SNAP benefits from January 1st to June 30th, and probably late May or early June, that household is going to receive the recertification form. In order for it to be timely, DSS must have the completed form by June 15th. That gives DSS time to process it by the end of the month so that the household can receive their July SNAP benefits uninterrupted. If it's received untimely, it would be received from June 16th to the end of the month. In that situation, DSS can still process it, but there may be a delay in getting those July benefits. Similarly, that form can be submitted all the way up until the end of July. However, though, the household probably isn't going to get their July benefits, and they would only get August benefits because it's late. After the end of July, though, it's too late at that point to submit a recertification, and instead the household would need to reapply instead. And just note that it is required to be in the possession of DSS by the 15th day of the last month. And so mailing it that day often isn't going to be sufficient. It needs to actually be with DSS by the 15th. There are certain changes that have to be reported during the certification period. The SNAP household has to report if an able-bodied adult without dependents stops working an average of 80 hours a month. If anyone in the SNAP household receives lottery or gambling winnings of $4,250 or more, or if the household's income goes above 130% of the federal poverty level. Those are all things that have to be reported. After an application or recertification, DSS will send the household a letter that tells them what 130% of the federal poverty level is by household size. And that's the number to remember. So if the household's income goes above that number, that needs to be reported. The household is not required to report an increase in expenses or a decrease in income, as long as someone is still working an average of 80 hours a month who has to. But reporting these changes can increase your SNAP benefits because it can increase what you're eligible for. And then lastly, we're going to talk a little bit about the SNAP appeal process and knowing your rights in a SNAP appeal. So most importantly, you have appeal rights. If you disagree with an action taken by DSS that impacts your SNAP benefits, you most likely have appeal rights in most situations. And when I say appeal, I mean request a hearing. It's the same process. So if you get a letter about an action that you disagree with, you should read that written notice from DSS very carefully. Usually on the back, it explains your appeal rights and your deadline to appeal. There are two main types of SNAP hearings. The first are state fair hearings, These are used for disputes regarding someone's eligibility for SNAP benefits, their SNAP household benefit amount, as well as an overpayment. And then the second are administrative disqualification hearings. These are only used in situations involving intentional program violations or IPVs. The first, the state fair hearings. An opportunity for a fair hearing must be provided to any household that's negatively impacted by a DSS action that affects their participation in SNAP. If you want to appeal, you need to make a clear statement, either oral or written, to DSS that you want to present your case to a higher authority. We generally recommend a written statement just because it's trackable, it's easy to get a receipt for that, but oral is sufficient too, including an oral request made over the phone. Generally, a request for a fair hearing must be made within 90 calendar days of the date on the DSS notice that you disagree with. In some cases, DSS has to continue SNAP benefits at the prior level if they're being reduced, as long as the hearing request is made within 10 days. And these hearings are conducted by a state hearing officer with the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. They're usually conducted over the phone. And so it's not someone else at DSS making the decision or your caseworker making the decision. It's a hearing officer with the state. In contrast, these administrative disqualification hearings are only used when DSS believes it has clear and convincing evidence that someone has committed one or more acts of intentional program violation or IPV. And this occurs when a SNAP household member knowingly, willfully, and with deceitful intent commits a fraudulent act. These can include things like making false statements or hiding information to get SNAP benefits they're not eligible for, misusing their EBT card, including selling or trading SNAP benefits, or using SNAP benefits to buy food for or share food with someone who is not in the SNAP household. If DSS believes the household has committed an IPV, they will send the household written notice in the mail about that. The notice will include the date for their local disqualification hearing where they have a chance to be heard. DSS usually includes a waiver form with this notice that says you can agree to just waive the disqualification hearing and accept the consequences, but you don't have to sign this waiver. And signing the waiver means that you are essentially admitting to the IPV, and there's some pretty significant consequences, which we'll talk about later. So just make sure that you understand what you're doing before you sign that waiver. The hearing officer for local disqualification hearings is someone at DSS who has not been previously involved in the case. The hearing officer must provide the household with a copy of the decision. It often comes by certified mail, and the SNAP household then has 15 calendar days from the date of the decision to appeal. After an appeal, the household will then have a state disqualification hearing with the hearing officer from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. So as you can see, there are significant consequences to an intentional program violation. For the first violation, the result is a 12-month SNAP disqualification. So that means the person who committed the program violation cannot get SNAP benefits for 12 months. For the second violation, it's a 24-month SNAP disqualification. For the third violation, it's a permanent SNAP disqualification. There's also a special category of consequences for people who misrepresent their residence and/or their identity to receive multiple benefits across multiple states. They get a 10-year SNAP disqualification. This disqualification, though, does apply only to the person who actually committed the violation. So other people in the household can still receive SNAP benefits, but that person who committed the violation cannot. In addition to the disqualification, all adult members of the SNAP household can be jointly responsible for paying back the SNAP benefits that the household should not have received or that they misused. So here are some of the rights of the SNAP household during the hearing process. Before the hearing, They or their representative can review the case file and records that DSS plans to use at the hearing. The household can choose to represent themselves, get legal counsel, or have another spokesperson represent them. The household can bring their own witnesses and submit any evidence, such as records, receipts, or other statements, that they believe will help explain the case. They can question or challenge any testimony or evidence presented by DSS, and they can also request a postponement of up to 30 days if they need more time to prepare or to try to get legal counsel. And now I'm happy to take questions if anyone has any. But remember, like Marissa said at the beginning, I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. And so I can't give specific advice on any particular situations. But I'm happy to clarify or further explain any of the information that I've shared. I also have here how to get in contact with legal aid if you think that you need our help with a SNAP issue. We have our helpline number, as well as our senior helpline number for those who are 60 or older. And you can also apply online for our help as well.
Awesome. And so I'm not seeing any questions at the moment. If you have a question you cannot unmute in this forum, you either need to type it in the Q&A box on Zoom or the comment section on Facebook if you have a question. Gonna leave just a few moments to see if any questions do come in. All right, as I am not seeing any questions, I'm going to go ahead and say thank you to all of you for joining us, with a special thank you to Lainey for presenting. If you would like to review anything that was discussed today, we have posted a recording of today's presentation to our Facebook page. It will be immediately available. You can access this recording with or without a Facebook account at www.facebook.com/legalaidnc. You can also access this recording on our YouTube page. If you would like to register for one of our other Listen and Learn programs, such as Medicaid, child custody, civil divorce, tenant rights, you can do so on our website at www.legalaidnc.org/clinics. Thank you all so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.